All right. Hello, everyone. Very exciting episode here today. I am joined with a Mr. Jacob Diaz, the Undercover Virologist. We're going to talk all about how virus theory is bogus. We're going to dive into this. A lot of our audience is already on the terrain theory side, but hoping to give you a little bit more to dig into here and talk about how the studies that tried to prove virology in the first place have been mostly bogus. Lots of stuff here. I'm very excited. Jacob has been doing a lot on Instagram under the name Undercover Virologist. Jacob, are you on TikTok too or anything?
I'm on Telegram and Twitter, but it's really honestly just Instagram for like my content and everything. I just use the other two to repost in case I get deleted.
Those links will be in the description. And I don't think we need much more of an intro. I'm very excited. Let's jump in. Jacob, what's up? Who are you? How'd you get into this?
Man, what's up, man? Who am I? I'm just literally a regular guy who in 2019, as with many people in this space, just smelled something very off with what we were being told in the news, specifically in the studies that were being posted that were saying, oh, this virus out of Wuhan is going to do X, and it just didn't make sense to me. I'm from New York City. So at the time I was living in Brooklyn, and a lot of the stuff wasn't adding up with, the bodies and the filled hospitals and the people dropping dead, and I just wasn't seeing any of that. What I was seeing were people being fearful over something that honestly the scientific literature never proved. And I got into the work of Dr. Cowan, Dr. Kaufman, Dr. Amanda Vollmer, Stefan Lanka, Alex Zek in The Way Forward, where he was having podcasts about it. And it just kind of connected with me and just clicked where I was like, yeah, this stuff never was proven. And honestly, for me, I never really bought the whole virus idea ever since I was a kid. It just didn't make sense to me. And then just going into that, I befriended so many people in the terrain space. We have a really big, terrain practitioner group chat that we talk about all these topics. We ask questions, we debate. We're a big family. We work on projects together, and ever since 2019 up until now in 2024, I've just gone really deep into this. Learning to be a naturopathic practitioner currently. So I want to make this my career, and I just, I try to make this stuff very easy to understand for people. I go on Instagram, I make posts about every disease known to man. I, debunk a bunch of virology studies. We're part of a project right now that's huge with regarding to controls in virology. So, we did the end of COVID, which was an online school. We've done a lot. And I want to keep doing this probably for the rest of my life. But yeah, it's been amazing.
So, from my perspective in the health business, I do see the viral space as one of the biggest scams. I mean, there's lots of scams. The FDA and pharmaceutical companies have tried to ban vitamins since like the 1930s, suppressing information, patenting things so that no one can develop them. They own the patent on them, all kinds of stuff. But every few years, there's this new campaign for a new virus, a new vaccine. This has been happening my whole life, at least. I lived in Toronto when SARS hit, and
Mm.
that was a big hoo-ha there, and everyone was scared, and they were wearing masks and all this stuff, and they didn't have a vaccine push at that time. But again, every few years they come out with something new: H1N1, H5N1, bird flu, swine flu, all these different things, and it never seems to really amount to anything. Although, of course, 2020 was different, and I do want to get deeper into that. But yeah, huge scam. There's been studies showing that maybe I shouldn't say studies when I don't have them right here in front of me. But for many, many years, many, many people have run the numbers on flu statistics and stuff and have been disputing the idea that flu shots have anything to do with reducing the flu occurrence or reducing the severity of symptoms, and all the stuff that these needles are promoted to do. Just seems again and again whenever you peel into it that it's just not true, just a huge scam. And 2020 was the encore of this, where trillions of dollars were stolen from the people for these fake interventions for what I would say is a fake virus as well. And yeah, maybe I don't need to go too deep into that, but this one thing, if people stopped listening to this one thing from the medical establishment, we would all be better off. I sell supplements and we promote food advice and all that's great, but if you just stop putting poison in your body in the form of pharmaceutical needles,
Yeah.
you're going to be better off. Your children are going to be better off. This is if you do nothing else. If you eat McDonald's and drink 7-Eleven big gulps, you'll still be better off if you don't put poison directly into your veins. And of course, those poisonous needles not not only contain poison, also contain food particles such as eggs, peanut oil, and other carriers, they call them. And of course, when you inject actual food proteins into the blood, your body reacts to them with an immune response, which it's supposed to do because you're not supposed to have food particles
Yeah.
in the blood. So, Jacob, what was the first thing about the viral theory that really got you saying, nah, this isn't right?
It was the isolation stuff, as with a lot of people, where you're supposed to prove something exists by literally just showing it exists. I mean, it's pretty logical, pretty simple. And if you can't do that, you can't make claims that are positive that something exists. And when I was looking into these studies specifically, with measles. It started off with John Enders, and John Enders was a bacteriologist, also virologist, quote unquote. He saved modern day virology by conducting an experiment where he took a culture and then he nuked it with a bunch of different chemicals and dyes and samples of all kinds. And he saw it break down and he said, boom, that's a virus right there. And from then on, that has been the way virologists have done it. Since 1954 onward, this is what they do. And it never made sense when I started reading these papers. Measles, polio, COVID, AIDS, all of these things were done the same way. And just a logical, intelligent person will read it and be like, they're never actually proving a characterized particle exists in the fluids first. They're just combining stuff in a culture and then seeing an effect. And then they see the effect and they claim that is proof of the independent variable that they don't ever prove. And so from then on, I just started connecting the dots with the whole genomic side, them creating all these genomes out of thin air, the whole vaccines with not really having anything to do with any sort of immunity, and the false pretense that antibodies mean that you're never going to get sick. All of it was just connected. And that got into even deeper with germ theory and bacteria, fungus, yeast being part of the pleomorphic cycle, and learning about how they don't cause disease. They're actually responders to a disease state. So it all just started from the whole isolation, the lack of proof that there was an actual particle, because you need to show the particle exists if you're going to say that we need to mask up, that we need to stay 6 feet away, that we need to get 5 boosters. You got to show us it's real. And if you can't do it, I mean, it's that simple.
So let me get this straight. They're taking a tissue sample, putting a bunch of chemicals in it, and then looking at what occurs. And they're saying that's a virus because there's particles, foreign particles, they say, in it.
Correct. And what they do is they see the breakdown of the cell culture. They'll see particles form, and they will assume that those particles were in the sample that they added into the culture. So if they take my lung fluid, for instance, they're not going to check if there's particles in my lung fluid, because all virologists say, and we have debated virologists, we have talked to them, they say you can't isolate a virus directly from the sample of a sick host. What? So you're saying this, so say I have COVID, say COVID invaded my body and my spit is filled to the brim with COVID, all of these particles. Shouldn't there be particles in my sample, whether it be a lung fluid, whether it be skin, whether it be something from my kidneys, spit, whatever? There should be a lot of virus in there because I'm sick. But from the sample, they can't isolate viruses directly. They can't see them. And when we say viruses, we're talking about a submicroscopic pathogenic replication competent particle. That's what a virus is, an intracellular parasite. So if you're saying it causes disease, you should find it in my sample. They don't. They just take a sample. And then after that, as you said, they add all of these chemicals that are actually found in the vaccines as well, because they use cell cultures to make vaccines many times. They'll add fetal bovine serum, which is cow blood. They'll add eosin, they'll add trypsin, hematoxylin, they'll add formaldehyde. They'll add all of these growth stimulants like Delbeckel's modified eagle medium. They'll nuke the cell with like 5 different antibiotics that they'll use in viral transport medium. And all of these antibiotics are actually toxic to the cell itself. Many times they'll use kidney cells. And kidney cells are very easy to break down. Specifically, they'll use monkey kidney cells that are inbred in the lab, so they're very weak. So then you add amphotericin or gentamicin, which are toxic to kidney tissue, you see the breakdown. And then they bring down the nutrient broth, so the cell actually begins to starve. So obviously, the cell's going to break down. You're killing it. And they see the breakdown and they say, oh, there's the virus right there. But then when we do control experiments, which I'm actually making a post right now about all the historical control experiments, we see the same particles, the virus particles, in healthy human tissue all the time. Previous to COVID era, during the HIV era, we have seen these particles, whether they call them exosomes, microvesicular bodies, clathrin-coated vesicles, you name it, they have a lot of names for these particles. But if they're present in all healthy people, they can't be viruses. So they see these particles and then they claim, oh, it's a virus, even though another doctor will call it an exosome, or another doctor will say, oh, it's just a clathrin-coated vesicle. And then they'll make claims. And then from the runoff of that culture, they'll put it into an electron microscopy method where they're using different dyes, they're using different stains, and then they bombard it with electron beams. They slice a little piece of it, they take a picture, and they say, boom, there's the virus. But none of it was ever natural. None of it was ever there. And they're not controlling to see if the culture itself is the reason there's a breakdown, or the electron microscopy is the reason you see these particles. They don't do controls because it's not an adequate science. You're not starting off with something in the sample first. So that shows you don't have an independent variable. And then you nuke it to death and you see it break down and you're making a claim. It's affirming the consequent. The virus is there because there's cytopathic effect. Cytopathic effect means there's a virus. However, they never show the virus.
So this is basically failing to fulfill number 2 of Koch's postulates, right? Number 1 is this must be present in all cases of the disease. Number 2, it must be isolated from diseased patients, not from all these extra steps. It's supposed to be isolated from diseased patients. So this is a scam that goes all the way back to the beginning, yeah?
Wait to the, and it's funny you mentioned the Koch postulates because I actually have them, I have them right there. And the first one is actually in the particle or whatever needs to actually be found in the fluids first. So they can't even fulfill the first one. So they can't even find these virus particles in the sample itself. So they just fail right then and there. And I just made a video, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, where people like contenders for the virus theory, they'll say, oh, Koch postulates are for bacteria, not viruses. But Koch postulates are very logical. You can apply them to any particle you want. If you can't find it, it's not there, which is why they made Rivers postulates, which are easier to fulfill, but still can't be fulfilled with viruses. So yeah, it goes back all the way to the beginning with Louis Pasteur and his rabies, or Ivan Iwanowski with tobacco mosaic. They weren't finding anything. They were just taking unpurified garbage and injecting it into animals. That's how it all started.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know too that from the very beginning of these vaccine experiments, I guess we should put quotes on experiments. This was one of the big problems to me. They're literally just taking biological material and injecting it literally into the brain of another animal. In many, many cases, that was the experiment. And then they'd, see whether the animal got sick or not. I mean, it's just madness because if you inject monkey brain into another monkey brain, you're probably going to see a problem. But they're using that as proof, so-called proof that, oh, the virus has been transmitted to another animal. No, you just injected a brain into another brain.
Yeah.
And of course, you're going to see a negative effect. Could you elaborate on this? This is still done today?
It's still done today. They were doing it recently, I think 2020-ish. They were doing it with ferrets, right? So they will take, as you mentioned, unpurified just fluid or sick mush, whether it be brain, kidney, liver, whatever organ you can imagine, they've done it. They'll take that and claim there's a virus in there, just assuming there's a virus in there. Usually they'll run PCR.
Because they can't isolate it.
Because they can't isolate it. They can't find it. So they'll do indirect tests like an antibody test or a PCR test. And we can get into that. The PCR test is not a test, first off. It's an amplification tool that is meant to literally just try to find sequences. But if you can't find the virus, you can't claim there's sequences to that virus. So they'll do an indirect test. They'll take a sample that they assume a virus is in there from a sick animal or human most of the time. And with that sample, you have a bunch of waste products in there. One, when we're sick, we're making waste products. Our lymphatic system is flushing things out. Our blood is flushing things out. The kidneys and livers are doing their thing. There's going to be bacteria in there. There's going to be food particles. There's going to be mitochondria, ribosomes, white blood cells, you name it, it's going to be in there. They take that and then usually they'll inject it directly into the abdomen or the brains or the lungs or the mouths of these animals. And they can be very weak, like maybe 2-3 week old mice that are, hybrid mites. They're made to be weak and grown in a lab. They're not healthy. So you're injecting like a ridiculous amount of fluid into this tiny little mouse, or they'll inject it into the monkey with polio, for instance. I made a post about polio. They took polio brain tissue and then they injected it directly into the brain of a monkey. And they took polio spinal tissue and they injected it directly into the abdomen. And then when the monkey dies, oh yeah, polio caused the monkey to die. But you're not running controls there. If I were to take, and I always use this example, if I took peanut butter, some Jif peanut butter, I grabbed it, I took a 4 spoonfuls, and I injected it directly into a baby's brain, what would happen? The baby will die almost immediately. The brain will become inflamed and they'll die. Does that mean there's a virus in the peanut butter? Or is it just foreign material that is not supposed to be in the body causing death? I think that's very simple for people to understand. And in these virology experiments, when you go way back to Ivan Ivanovsky with the tobacco mosaic, he was taking all of these sick plants and blending them up and adding a bunch of chemicals in it, and then taking that soup and then scratching plants with the soup and injecting it into their stems. And sometimes they'd get sick and he'd claim, oh, there's a virus in there. But there's
a plant virus.
A plant virus. But you're not showing that there's an actual particle in these plants. You're just taking something and then injecting it into a plant. And we've never seen a plant walk up to another plant and inject it with something, right? It's not natural. So what a lot of these virologists will do unnatural in vivo or in vitro experiments that are not indicative of what happens in nature at all. No dog is going to come up to another dog and inject his rabid fluid into his brain, which is what Louis Pasteur would do. He would take cups and cups of this rabid fluid from the lungs and the mouths of golden retrievers and then inject it into another dog's brain. And then when the dog would foam at the mouth, he'd claim rabies was a contagious virus, even though he never saw a virus. So you're just taking this fluid that is filled with stuff and you're experimenting with it and you're killing animals in the process without anything that's actually purified or isolated.
And of course, everyone should keep in mind that the body has pretty elaborate mechanisms for filtering things before it gets into the blood.
Exactly.
This is a big role of our digestive system. We've got enzymes in our mouth, and of course, we chew things up real fine. And then in the stomach, it's a super strong stomach acid, breaks things up even further, goes into the intestine. There's even more chemistry going on, break it up all even further so that the body can isolate the good stuff and absorb it into the blood, and the rest comes out in waste. And of course, we all know you can get sick by consuming that waste or ingesting that waste in some way. So what we're talking about here is different from bacteria, yeast, fungus, mold. All of that stuff can be isolated, can be cultured without all this nonsense, and can be transmitted, correct?
Correct. So with these germs, and it's pretty conclusive now, we know they exist. You can see them on the skin. You can see them in the blood. You can see them in the interstitial fluids. You can see them in the lymphatic system. You can see them in the body. If I were to take just a little swab of my mouth and then put it onto a petri dish, add some growth stimulants, you'll see bacteria there. They're there. That's the thing. We know they're there because we can isolate them directly from the fluids. You can't do that with a virus. If I were to take a sample and then put it on some electron microscopy, you're not going to see anything. You're just going to see maybe 1 or 2 particles that are doing absolutely nothing, that you have to actually prove are doing something. So that's the whole contention here. We in the terrain space, we don't say germs don't exist. We say viruses don't exist because viruses have never been proven to exist. Germs, bacteria, fungus, yeast, mold, part of the pleomorphic cycle coined by Béchamp, by Enderlein, by Gaston Naessens, by Royal Raymond Rife, all these people are part of the bioremediating cycle of the microzyma. They're there. We know they're there because we can see them and you can experiment on them. And then you mentioned the whole transference. Yeah, I can take a bacteria and I can feed it to my dog or my cat or whatever. Yeah, you can transfer a bacteria. But as with the literature stating, you can't really transfer disease. That's the whole point. We know the bacteria is there, but we can't show a causative factor for the bacteria. So that goes deeper into the whole germ theory where it's never actually been proven. But we do know the germs are there. We just apply characteristics to them that are not, real.
You think this has anything to do with the fact that they can't make a vaccine for bacteria or mold or fungus or worms?
I think so. Yeah. They can't make a profit off of properly made bacterial vaccines. So they'll just, push the whole germ theory so they can make money off of antibiotics, so they can make money off of hand sanitizer, all these antimicrobial agents. The whole idea of everything needs to be sterile is very profitable.
You mentioned the name Béchamp,
Mm-hmm.
French guy, French
Right.
scientist. If I have the story correct, he was in opposition to Pasteur from the very beginning, but Pasteur was a better marketer,
Yeah.
better at,
Politician.
but yeah,
Yeah.
better at talking to the media and puffing his chest out and claiming, miraculous discoveries and stuff. What happened between these two?
So Béchamp was just an ingenious dude. He was amazing, and I'm reading his stuff currently just to keep everything fresh in my head. And what he was able to show, essentially, for anyone listening, is that there are microbial stem cells in the blood and in the body of people, obviously, of animals, and even in the soil and in minerals too. They're surrounding us. And these little dots that he would see in the living blood, mind you, different from virology where they don't see anything living, they see dead stuff. Béchamp was seeing living things. He saw that these microzyma, he named the microzyma, would adapt to the environment that the terrain of the person would be. So if there's a very toxic environment, you're going to see these microzyma change into different forms of bacteria that are going to respond to that specific issue. The bacteria are just the quote symptom of the issue. They're there to eat the dead tissue and recycle it so that your body can get rid of waste. That's why they're there. They're a reflection of the terrain. And he saw that the more toxic the terrain was, the more deeper in the pleomorphic cycle they will become. So you'll see bacteria then eventually form into fungus, which are helping you, but also slowly decaying you because fungus only survive in the highly toxic environments. And then essentially you get more toxic, you become mold. So the molding is connected with cancer, where you're essentially decaying molding of the body. So you have to listen to the pleomorphic cycle and actually reverse it by listening to what it's telling you. It's amazing and it's ingenious and it shows how intelligent the whole design is. They're reflecting your health. So the whole idea of pathogenic bacteria is completely null because one, we see all these bacteria in healthy people, but two, they're just responding to the terrain of the person. And then when you fix the terrain, they revert back into microzymas. And many other people, I mentioned Gaston Naissons, Royal Raymond Rife, Gunther Endelin, Claude Bernard, they all built upon what Béchamp was showing. Louis Pasteur, he basically saw what they were doing and was like, nah, the germs are causing the disease. And then he also stole a lot of the information that Béchamp was publishing. And as you said, he was a really good speaker. He was a great politician. He knew how to lie. And in the book, Béchamp v. Pasteur, a lost chapter in history, you see a lot of the lies that Pasteur was saying and obfuscating what he was doing in his experiments when he was lying to the public, especially with the vaccines and the cows and the sheep. But he was killing thousands of animals with these vaccines, but saying, "Oh, they're good for you." So he was, connected to the crown. And you want to go deeper, he was also a Mason. So he had the backing of a lot of these big, powerful people, these corporations. And his theory of germs causing disease was pushed as fact because then you can make money off of that belief. Whereas Béchamp and everybody else was saying the health is up to you. It's up to your terrain. Your choices are what reflects your health. That does not make money. That does not push fear. So we obviously are now today in a situation where everything is now germ theory, virus, yada, yada.
And this embracing of the viral theory comes from the same profession that refused to believe that doctors who didn't wash their hands were killing women giving birth in hospitals, right? It take them, am I correct on that? It took them like 40 years to come out and say, okay, okay, doctors can wash their hands.
Yeah, basically. And that's what's funny and a lot of the contentions that I've seen with terrain is they would bring up that example. And I believe it was Semmelweis who was the one that popularized the whole idea of just washing your hands. They'll say, "Oh, isn't washing your hands proof that germ theory is real?" No. So when we talk about during that time, we're talking late 1800s, early 1900s. These surgeons, these allopaths, first off, nobody liked them. They were the original snake oil salesmen because they would, push, bloodletting, using lancets, using little leeches to filter the blood. They would make concoctions of a bunch of unpurified chemicals and kill people. So no one really liked them.
And they're
But
still
they were,
using mercury
and they still using them. They still use it to
antimony,
this day. Exactly.
arsenic, and yeah.
Aspirin was really toxic back then as well. So in these hospitals, they would, if I'm a surgeon, I'm dealing with someone with a wound and I'm just, filled with blood and pus. And then I deal with somebody with a digestive problem and now I'm filled with poop and fecal matter. And then I deal with a woman who is in a stressful environment, giving birth, laying down, which is bad for the baby, first off. She's probably given a lot of drugs and painkillers. And then when the baby comes out, I'm touching the vaginal canal and the baby with all of this blood, pus, and fecal matter. All of that is waste. So now the baby dies and the mother gets an infection and dies. And now you claim it's the germ and not not the simply, the waste. And also I'm using all these chemicals like carbolic acid and lime was used as well. All these chemicals that were being introduced into the canal. And now you get death and you claim it's a germ. And then Semmelweis came along and he was like, yeah, let's just rinse our hands with some water, maybe use some soap, and boom, we're clean. And then all the deaths went straight down. That's not indicative of germ theory being true. That's simply hygiene. And terrain pushes hygiene. You want yourself to be clean. You want to be, limiting your exposure to toxins. You want to clean your body from any toxic exposure, anything accumulated throughout the day. You'll be fine. And it's connected with the whole, smallpox and measles and all those pandemics where primarily they were due to poor hygiene conditions where people were dumping their waste in the streets. They were eating a bunch of garbage. They were using makeups filled with mercury. So their bodies would just fill with boils and then they die and they claim it's a virus. When in actuality, all the places in the surrounding areas that were very clean, that got rid of their waste, that got adequate water filtration, did not suffer from any smallpox or cholera or measles because it's just simply hygiene. And it doesn't prove germ theory, it just proves you want to be clean.
And by the way, this wasn't just washing hands. Like I read stuff talking about what this was like in the 1800s, 1700s, in big cities, London, Vienna, whatever. And in a lot of these places, they're literally taking their waste from a bucket and throwing it in the basement. Throwing it in the basement. Can you imagine doing this today, right? Filling up your basement.
Imagine the stench.
And not just you, right? You've got 12 people in the house, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You got your parents in the house if they're still alive. You got like 8 kids. All kinds of people are in the house. Everybody's pooping in buckets and throwing it in the basement or throwing it directly out the window. Like, of course, these were unhealthy conditions.
Yeah, exactly. And then when they dump it into the water, it's like then the water doesn't get filtered, and then you develop cholera, which was said to be bacterial in nature. But when you filter the water, guess what? You're healthy. Max von Pettenkofer was one of the big guys who disproved cholera, as well as Claude Bernard. They actually, in their teaching, would drink a cup of cholera bacilli every single semester in front of their students. And they never got sick because they were showing it's not the germ, it's the germ responding to whatever toxic exposure is in this case, the water. So now you have all these people, again, you said they're living in the same household, they're dumping their waste, they're eating garbage, they're covering their skin with garbage, they're not showering. It's horrible. And then that connects into the whole bringing cows into the inner cities with all of this industrial revolution, and you're feeding the cows a lot of garbage, and then the cows get sick, and then you drink their milk, and then you get sick, and you want to blame it on another germ. It's just a revolving door of just nonsense that people blame the germ instead of their own actions.
One of my favorite books on terrain theory is The Moth in the Iron Lung by Forrest Meredy. And he was talking about how the whole polio thing, like they were trying to, take tissue samples and inject them into other animals to prove that polio was a thing and all this stuff. And they developed a vaccine, and they still claim today that that's one of the great successes of vaccine theory. Whereas the book, The Moth and the Iron Lung, made a great case that this was actually just due to the overuse of pesticides, and the
Yep.
people who were being exposed to these very toxic pesticides were getting sick and potentially dying. What do you think about this story?
1000% agree. It was DDT and lead arsenate specifically. Also, Paris green was one. These insecticides and pesticides, what they were literally designed to do was destroy the neurological system of the bug. that's literally what they were marketed to do. So, what makes you think that that's not going to happen to humans exposed to the same thing? And it's a lot of correlation there, where you literally will see the graphs of the use of DDT rising with polio incidence rising. And then when they cut DDT and lead arsenic, all of a sudden polio starts going down. In my second polio post, I even go into the whole, they were trying, desperately to isolate polio virus and whatnot. And they were finding that all of these cases were actually from children, especially in upstate New York, where actually I live, in farms that were recently sprayed with pesticides. And then, like 2 or 3 days later, these children start having malaise, flu-like symptoms. They start having issues with their spine. They can't really walk properly, and they call it polio. And they don't connect it to the pesticides they just sprayed. I believe the president during that time, I forget his name. I'm not getting deep into presidents. He was paralyzed because he went to an apple farm like a couple weeks prior that was recently sprayed with DDT. So it's the connection was always there. And when one of the studies, they actually, they took polio particles and they put it into milk and they fed it to people, and nobody got sick. And in other studies during that time, during the 50s especially, they were finding that, mercury poisoning, arsenic poisoning, all of these poisons can actually lead into polio. So it was always neurological poisons, primarily from the industrial industry, that was leading to people developing illness. It was never a virus. And then the whole vaccine argument that I always hear about polio. What they did, and I go into it in my post, Jonas Salk copied what I forget, I think it was it John Enders or someone else. He copied basically his friend and took chicken fibroblast cells and also human embryonic cells, so aborted fetal tissue, and then he embedded it with polio waste, and then used a bunch of toxins like formaldehyde and aluminum, and he made that his vaccine, and he marketed it as a successful vaccine. And then when people start developing polio from the vaccine, they actually, I believe it was the AMA, I believe I'm quoting it correctly, during that time, they essentially made it illegal to diagnose polio the way they were doing it for like a decade prior. So they made it harder for polio to be diagnosed. And then they made a bunch of subset diseases that were very similar to polio, mainly MS, ALS, acute flaccid paralysis, all of these paralytic diseases that were coming out after the polio vaccines. They were calling something else. They were calling another disease. So now you bring the diagnosis of polio all the way down on top of not using DDT nearly as much. And then you start calling everything else a different disease. Polio disappeared. But then now when the Bill Gates Foundation, I believe in 2017, has a mass vaccination campaign of over 100,000 children of polio vaccines, a bunch of these children start developing neurological issues and paralysis. And nobody wants to talk about it because it was always the neurological issues. It was never a virus. And I heard recently, I think it was in 2022, where they were testing people's wastewater and they were finding sequences of the polio virus. And they were just, again, pushing the whole fear, where we're going to check your poop. Now we're going to check your water and see if there's polio in there. Now we can make you get a vaccine. And then when you get the vaccine and you inject all that garbage into your blood, you develop polio.
So this is kind of like the opposite situation in 2020, where they reclassified the flu. There was no flu anymore in order to make the COVID numbers go up. They renamed the disease and changed the criteria for diagnosing the disease so that on paper it disappeared.
Exactly. And they did the same thing in, I believe, 2022, 2023 with COVID. Now, before you saw all the flu, cold, pneumonia, whatever, all the way down during the peak of the pandemic. But towards the end, now you see influenza and cold all rising conveniently. Oh, they just disappeared because COVID was the dominant, you know, virus in this case. No, it's all having to do with the subjective diagnosis that all these people in power choose to follow.
In some of these books, you mentioned Thomas Cohen. I like that book
Mm,
as well. The Truth About Contagion. It was previously called The Contagion
mhm,
Myth. I believe it was in that book, but it was definitely in The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur
mm.
Firstenberg, where they talked about pandemics or plagues happening in conjunction with solar spots.
Yeah, with solar spots, with the advent of new radiation technology. So, with Arthur Firstenberg and Tom also elaborated on that, where specifically with the Spanish flu, I'll use that as an example. The Spanish flu, and I made a post about it. Primarily, it was due to mass vaccination. They were vaccinating a bunch of soldiers, Marines, whatever. They were vaccinating them with like 30 different vaccines. And then when they realized the war was going to end much sooner, they marketed all those vaccines to people. And then people started getting mass vaccines at around 30 per person. But the people that weren't getting vaccines, like Eleanor McBean and her family were taking care of people, they were perfectly fine. But also you connected to the use of radio waves during the World War, in this case World War One. They were using radio wave technology. And we know all of this technology is non-native electromagnetic fields, which are harmful. They're not akin to what we see with the Schumann resonance of the sun or the moon. These are natural radiation. In this case, this is man made. And then prior to that, you have the use of railway lines, which connected to chronic fatigue syndrome around the towns that were living near the railway lines. And then you have, I believe, the advent of Wi-Fi, and there was some solar flares in the 50s that connected to the whole Chinese flu pandemic in the 50s. And then you have it with COVID, with 5G. Where was 5G first installed and created? Wuhan, China. And the symptoms of COVID, in this case, on a made up umbrella, were very similar to not only influenza, but radiation sickness. The loss of taste and smell is connected to the loss of zinc in your tissues, as well as cyanide buildup in your tissues that leads to loss in taste and smell. You have the burning of the skin, you have the loss of hair, and you have the what was it, the malaise that you feel in a month or 2 months after your diagnosis, all connected to radiation sickness. So when you add all of this radiation that has been known to be a toxin, US naval intelligence, the CIA, the Russians, all of these corporations have done experiments and studies where they, they'll expose animals or humans and see what happens to them when they're exposed to radiation, and nothing ever good happens because it's not real. It's very toxic radiation. So when you install it across the world, you're going to get people that are going to start developing illness. And then you add on the fear, which is a toxin in and of itself. You add on the vaccines, you add on the masks that people can't breathe in, you add on whatever the hell they're spraying in the skies, whether it be chemtrails, whether it be heavy metals, whatever they're doing. All of that is accumulating in people, and now they just start developing illness. And then when they get sick, they blame it on a virus that you can't see.
How does this connect to sunspots? They're using this to explain how pandemics and stuff happened before EMF became a thing.
In my personal opinion, I don't personally believe that sunspots or solar flares or whatnot would have caused something like that. Personally, I don't think the evidence is as apparent as with non-native EMF, for instance. But some people have pointed out that sunspot activity, when the sunspots are more active, or there's more solar flares, or even when there's meteors, which actually connects to the Black Plague, where there's a lot of celestial phenomenon happening that essentially raises the energy of the earth, causing people to develop illness because of the electricity changing. And when we know we're bioelectric beings, so we're very easily manipulated by the electricity and the energy around us. So when there's a massive change, whether caused by a sunspot, whether caused by a solar flare, whether caused by a meteor or whatnot, that's going to change the electrical component of the body and the earth, which leads us to get sick. So I believe that celestial phenomenon can definitely affect how we feel. The sun and the moon are perfect examples. Do I believe that solar flares or whatnot can cause a pandemic, something like that? Personally, no.
Fair enough. And I'm glad you're not just repeating all the stuff from these books because this is
Yeah.
something I've been stuck on myself as well. I've seen other people connecting the plagues, especially the Black Death, to worldwide catastrophes,
Yeah.
basically volcanoes and
Volcanoes. Yeah.
mud floods,
Yeah.
just very, very seismic changes in the environment. There's accounts of fire raining from the sky
Yeah.
and all this stuff.
And that's
So
when I was making my Black Plague post, I was reading these accounts and I was like, oh my God, like what happened? Like it sounds horrific. And there was I believe a scholar from Japan or was it Indonesia, some Southern Asian country where they talked about a massive volcanic eruption that caused the sky to turn black and the sun was red and the Europeans were talking about the same thing. So something did happen. But since we weren't there and there's not a lot of evidence other than tree ring analysis and ice analysis, we can't make a positive claim. We do know that it wasn't from a Yersinia pestis bacteria because the evidence was never there.
fair enough. Okay, so you brought up COVID. A lot of people are very, very interested in COVID. I want to circle into this.
Go ahead.
So, Jacob, you probably don't know, but I run a cell phone tower account on Instagram. It's called Transcend Towers. I've been doing it for many years. I've been very concerned about the EMF problem for many years and in the business too, selling anti-EMF devices and
Nice.
encouraging people to cancel their phone bills and all this stuff. So I've been on the front line of that for a long time. And when 2020 happened, a lot of people asked me and expected me to jump on that theory and say, "Oh yeah, well 5G in Wuhan,"
Mhm.
and say, "Oh yeah, well 5G in Wuhan, yeah, of course, you crank up the radiation." Okay, okay, okay. But I have several problems with that theory. The first being that the footage that we saw coming out of Wuhan and coming out of China to me is 100% fake. People,
Fake.
Chinese people falling dead on the streets, and they weren't falling dead. You can look at the footage. And I do have a documentary about this, by the way. It's called Wag the Dog Theory. Now I do it every year. There's 4 of them now.
That was you?
Wag the Dog
Okay.
Theory.
That was you. Okay. Now I'm connecting it now. I watched it. Yeah.
Great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what got
That's
me onto
funny.
this, right? People
Nice.
are like,
Okay.
hey, was it 5G? I'm like, well, 5G doesn't cause fake
Fake
people
pandemics. Yeah. Yeah.
falling over on the street. And you can watch the footage. You can see them break their fall and stuff like this. It's
Hmm.
clearly acting.
Clear as
I
day.
don't know why, other than to say this is to spark a pandemic, because, yeah, that's what we were being shown. A lot of people forgot about that. This is what we were being shown in Canada and America. And I was in both Canada and America during this time in late 2019, going back and forth, listening to the radio, watching the news. And this is what they were showing: Chinese people falling dead in the streets, emergencies in China, hospitals are full in China, all this stuff. But that footage was always fake from the beginning. So when people are saying, hey, did 5G cause this? I said, no, acting caused this, first of all. Then we've got random distribution of the actual occurrence because there was people getting sick. That this truly did happen.
Yeah.
For example, in Canada, we don't have 5G. If you're paying for 5G in Canada, you are being scammed. Take your phone into a repair person. They will show you that the chip that's supposed to be in it to inactivate 5G is not there. There's no 5G in Canada. That's fake. So clearly not everywhere had 5G, basically, right? There's still 4G, 3G, all this stuff. EMF itself is a problem aside from 5G, but a lot of people wanted to blame 5G. And I was there saying 5G isn't everywhere. There's cases in Utah. There's cases in Canada.
Mhm.
I live way up north in Ontario, Canada. There's cases up there, apparently. There's no 5G up there, right? So it's not 5G. And recently, last year, I was put on to, maybe earlier this year, Dr. Brian Ardis
Mhm.
with the antidote, very, very mind-blowing talk on Rumble, The Antidote. I strongly recommend that to anybody who's listening if you have not watched it yet. And that really, really changed the way that I thought about this because I got sick, right? I have a strong immune system. I take lots of nutrients and stuff, and not just me, other people in the business got sick as well. And it was a sickness that was not just a flu, not just a cold. It was not like anything we had really ever experienced before. And I don't mean to spoil it, but I guess we kind of have to talk about it here. That Dr. Brian Ardis was saying that this is snake venom, that they're putting snake venom into the water and maybe into some other sources as well. And that would explain why so many people got sick in a way that was unlike any other sickness, where it really did actually appear like it could be a viral or bacterial It felt like it. I mean, I've been sick before, right? I was very, very sick. What could have caused it? It wasn't just stress, right? It wasn't just my immune system crashing. My wife got it at the same time. What's going on? Were we exposed to snake venom? What do you think about this?
Okay, so when Brian Artis, and I when I preface this by saying he did fantastic work with exposing what they were doing in hospitals. So I don't hate the guy. I actually respect him very much. He did great work with exposing what they were giving people in hospitals, specifically remdesivir, that was very toxic, killing people left and right. The use of ventilators when not necessary. So he did great work. When he made this, I remember watching it, and I personally had a lot of issues with it because he was talking about certain peptides that were similar to snake venom found in, I believe it was positive PCR specimens or whatnot. Andrew Kaufman made a rebuttal video where he broke down the study that was cited as proof by Ryan Artis. And in that, it was very, very clear that in the study, it was simply one statement said, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, that the peptides found were snake venom like. They never show that it was actual snake venom in these samples. It was just similar. And then when you go deeper into the whole idea of snake venom, there is a difference between venom and poison. With snake venom, you can actually drink snake venom. However, when it's injected into your blood, it coagulates. It can cause very quick death. That's why you need an antidote when you go to the hospital. So if it was in the water and people were drinking snake venom, most of the time people would not get sick from it. And it's been done, and people have videos and studies where they drink venom and nothing happens because that's not the method of action that causes a snake to kill a human. You don't drink venom, you get it injected. So that was the other issue. And the third issue was the whole idea of people getting sick, right? So we know, and everyone saw those Wuhan videos, and any objective watcher would see that it was totally fake because that never happened in any other place in the world except for Wuhan, China. We literally saw people just laying down and then they were told to get up and they got up. Like, it was just utterly fake. 5G is a toxin. We know it's a toxin. We know that when you add more toxins to an already toxic environment, you should expect illness. 5G was not the cause of COVID. It was just another toxin that people now have to overcome. COVID is just a PCR test. And what I saw from 2019 to like 2022, 2023, a lot of people would claim I got sick because I had a positive PCR test. The PCR test, not a test. It was made by Corman Drosten, the COVID one specifically. It was made without a clinical sample. It was made without any supposed virus. He made it completely computer-generated sequences and then sent it out after the sequences were made public. So it was a complete fraud. Then people now start testing positive left and right. And now we have a perpetuated supposed pandemic, which is just a testing pandemic. Now, people did get sick, and I don't deny it. Personally, for me, in 2022, the latter part of 2022 or early 2023, really, I got sick. And throughout the whole, me in Brooklyn, I eventually moved back upstate, all this stuff. I never got sick. I was next to people that were getting sick, never got sick. I was next to people that got vaccinated that were very sick, never got sick. However, I did notice they were spraying stuff in the skies a lot. It was more than usual. I would see it, a couple trails here and there. This was insane amounts of trails I was noticing. And then when I noticed 10, 15, 20 trails in 1-2 hours, I developed something that I personally hadn't experienced for a very long time. It wasn't symptoms I had never experienced before, but at that level, never experienced it, where I did lose my taste and smell for like 2 or 3 days. It came back, whatever. But I had a pain in my lower back that was so bad I'd never experienced before. Respiratory illness, malaise, all that stuff, fever for like 2 days. Yeah, I let my body do its thing and I was fine, but it was very intense. And that type of detoxification for older people or people that are not healthy probably can kill them. It can. So do I believe that there was snake oil causing this? No. Do I believe that it was, radiation connected? Possibly, because here in New York, we do have a lot of 5G, but other places don't have 5G. So what could it be? Could it be something that's spraying in the skies? For sure. We know they're spraying in the skies. We know weather modification is real. We know they can include heavy metals. Can those heavy metals in the atmosphere coming down to humans become irradiated almost when exposed to 4G, 5G? Very possible. Can the vaccines even cause illness with other people? That has been a debate within the terrain camp. Can you have some illness from someone who was recently vaccinated to someone who didn't get a vaccine? Personally, I developed really enlarged lymph nodes when my wife got a vaccine. She didn't want to get it, but she was going to lose her job. So she got it. And then I developed really strong reaction in my lymph nodes when she got it. And I was like, this is weird. Never experienced this before. My mother was around her friends that got vaccinated. All of them got sick pretty badly. And then she had issues with her menstrual cycle. I even asked my followers and people on Telegram, have you seen people develop illness from people that got recently vaccinated? And a lot of people did. I didn't get a vaccine, but I was near my friend who was sick who had a vaccine, and I developed something weird. So I think there was something there, whether it be graphene or whatnot, whether it be something energetic. There was something that we did see people develop illness from other vaccinated people. I don't make any positive claims because unfortunately there's not a lot of evidence to support either. It's just kind of our intuition, just noticing things. My brother, his roommate got a vaccine. He developed really bad neurological issues. Then when he got his booster, my brother got a really bad hives rash the day after. To me, that's something there, but I just don't have the means to study it. So I don't believe it was snake venom. I do believe that the vaccines were doing something that have never been done before. And I do believe that when you connect, 5G and or EMF of any kinds on top of whatever they're spraying, on top of the fear, that people can definitely develop illness that they've never experienced before.
Do you think artists could have been onto something with the mode of delivery in the public water supplies? Like
If
if
you, I
it if
mean,
it wasn't snake venom, could it have been something similar, some modified
if
compound?
you modify a toxic compound and put it in the water supply, absolutely you can make people get sick. Like pretty logical. You put poison in the water, you put poison in the food, you put poison in the air, people are gonna get sick. Like I don't doubt what artist was saying with the means of action, whether it be in the water or whatnot. I do believe that they can do that. Fluoride, for instance, common toxin, put in the water, you can get sick from fluoride. So if they put something in the water that they modified, that's definitely possible. I've never seen something that they actually proved that they did, but I don't doubt it.
So I want to hover here because this is something I'm still uncertain about. Even I have written a book called Fake Diseases, and in the COVID chapter, I want to go and do a big update and do a second
Mhm.
edition because I don't think I was 100% on what was going on here. I agree. EMF has always been contributing to our poor health. That's always a thing. Junk food is always a thing. Stress, all the stuff. They stress you out on the media like no tomorrow. Of course, all of this is going to contribute. I am extremely intrigued by the artist theory, especially because we've actually used the antidote with several people. And the antidote for those who listening, I'm sorry for spoiling it, but I have to. It's nicotine. He recommended nicotine
Really?
patches.
Nicotine.
And we have we've had maybe 20, now it's maybe 25 people who had so-called long COVID symptoms or symptoms after being vaccinated.
Mm.
And our normal program wasn't doing anything for them. Maybe they're like arthritis is better, but they still have these weird ongoing fatigue, sometimes skin issues, all kinds
Mm.
of things that they are really certain happened after they got sick or after they got vaccinated. So we decided, why not? Let's try the nicotine patches. He recommended them. They're very cheap. So 20 plus people, roughly 20 people, most people actually did get a good and fast result from that. And I mean dramatic as well. These people have been trying whatever we're recommending for months, and we got great supplements, and we're telling them to get off processed foods. And a lot of these people, their symptoms were not going away. A few people got moderate improvement, and then there was a few people who got zero improvement at all from it.
Mm.
But that's one of the things that really made me think that artist is onto something big time, whether it is directly actual snake venom or not, or some kind of modified compound, because that nicotine did actually work. And I get it, placebo can work too if you really, really want something to work. That happens. We, in fact, actually want the placebo effect in our business. We
Mm.
want you to believe that what you're doing is good for you. We want you to get a result. But this seemed to be above placebo, especially because most of the people that we actually recommended it to, I'm sure they had a hard time believing it.
Yeah, I'd imagine, when you give somebody, and nicotine specifically can cause an inflammatory effect, and we know inflammation in the terrain space is healing. So whether there is a direct mechanism of action with nicotine and snake venom, we do know if you if you put something new in the body and the body reacts, that can be something good for the body. That's the whole premise of homeopathy. When you're taking something that is very concentrated, you put it to the body will know what to do with it. So there could be something there. I don't deny that there could be something that they put in the water for sure. The specific snake venom stuff, I personally don't know, but this kind of connects into another thing I could talk about with the ivermectin hydroxychloroquine stuff, where people would use ivermectin and then claim, oh, COVID's a parasite. So the thing with ivermectin, and we had an episode about it in the end of COVID, and I have a post about it as well. Ivermectin is essentially an anti-inflammatory. So when you put an anti-inflammatory into someone who is sick, and being sick, you're going to be inflamed, you're preventing the inflammation from occurring, your symptoms will go away. Ivermectin was created from a natural compound from soil, avermectin, and was used primarily marketed to horses with parasites as an anti-inflammatory. But when you give it to humans, you're going to have an anti-inflammatory effect. And it's been shown to be anti-inflammatory and pretty safe. But that's the problem with people that make these claims that, oh, this equals this. It was never shown that, COVID is a parasite. You never showed an actual parasite causing COVID symptoms in this case. And you never showed ivermectin to people that were sick in hospitals that was attacking parasites specifically. It's more so of a generalized anti-inflammatory that has other compounds in it. Same thing with hydroxychloroquine, which is a zinc ion morph and also anti-inflammatory. So you give people anti-inflammatories, and specifically with hydroxychloroquine, it actually helps the hemoglobin get into the blood and all that. So you're going to see positive effects regardless of what you use, as long as it's used properly in a safe way. So, but do I personally think that, nicotine would equal snake oil or ivermectin equals parasite or this not? I personally don't. Now, can it be helpful for people? Sure. And is it better than remdesivir? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, so I have no experience with ivermectin, by the way. I sell nutrition. I'm not allowed to prescribe drugs or anything like that.
Yeah, no.
And graphene
I
as
wouldn't
well.
use it either. So
Graphene as well is totally outside of my wheelhouse. I have no idea. I see the same posts that you do, I'm sure. I don't know.
Yeah.
It looks kind of scary, and I have absolutely no doubt that the people who run this world have no problem poisoning us from the air, from the water, from whatever. You're putting it into the food. Graphene, absolutely, this is not beyond them. But before I tell you my story of how I did actually get sick, because it is still strange to me, I still don't understand it. I do 100% agree that when you put people who are already sick for any reason, whether they had a cold or flu or whatever, anything, and you bring them into the hospital and you give them absolutely toxic drugs such as remdesivir and fentanyl, by the way, as well, right?
Yeah.
Fentanyl is an absolute epidemic. It's the leading cause of death in my town, and I'm sure many towns as well, because it's being added to drugs. And okay, so people go in, they're sick, and now this wasn't before. You go into a hospital with a cold before, they didn't put you on a ventilator immediately.
Yeah, they did do it, yeah.
But this is what the protocol became. And it wasn't just remdesivir. Again, it was fentanyl and other drugs, because they have to put you into kind of an artificial coma.
Yeah, and midazolam too in the UK. Midazolam was used as people to just knock people out, to stop their respiratory system from working, and then you give them all the antivirals.
And then you put the tube down their mouth as well,
and
right?
And then they die in 2 or 3 days, and you're like, oh, virus did it.
And this actually happened to my grandfather. He did not have COVID, and this was like beyond the actual This is like January 2023 or something like that, or a few days after Christmas 2022. Like it was mostly over. He goes in, he doesn't have COVID. They put him on a ventilator, and he's dead that night. Right.
Wow.
And I'm sure it was because of the drugs that they gave him, combined with the stress put on the body from just being on a ventilator in the first place, especially for someone who's sick. And he wasn't even extremely sick or anything. He was just a bit nervous, and they murdered him for that. And a lot of nurses and doctors have spoken out about this as well.
Oh, yeah.
That it was absolutely barbaric. Remdesivir was a brand new thing anyways. It was not tested, and it was pushed onto people. And I do believe that was the main cause of death, was actually going to a hospital was the most likely way that you were going to die. in the
and,
so-called
and
COVID
that connects
pandemic.
to with Brian Artis. He was publishing, not publishing. He was showing people the studies for remdesivir. It was marketed for Ebola, but it killed 50% of the people that took it. So they put it off market, and then they were like, oh, let's give it to people with COVID, and it causes renal failure, it causes liver failure, it causes pulmonary edema, which is fluid building up in your lungs. So people will obviously die when they're given remdesivir. It's just it was all money. Gilead Sciences promoted the drug and they made billions.
So all of that was horrific. Then, of course, they renamed the flu and called it COVID. And then, yeah, 5G did get introduced in many different cities, and they've got this massive fear campaign. And if you believe you're going to get sick, you probably are going to get sick. All of that, I do agree, that is what the bulk of the pandemic was. But
Yes.
I still am open to believing in some sort of an extra poison, especially being put into the water supply, because I'll tell you my story now.
Go ahead. Yep.
It was, I believe, December of 2019. I was in Las Vegas for a conference. I only say this starting all the way back here in Vegas because this was actually the only time I've drank tap water in a very, very long time. It was one single glass, and it was because one of my friends said, "Oh, I have this stuff here that if you put it in the tap water, it'll off gas all the bad stuff in it." I said, "Okay, I'll try this just this one time." I'm not saying that that one glass of tap water did it, but on the road, I'm washing my hands in unfiltered water. I'm
Mm.
showering in unfiltered water. Normally, I have a water filter for
Yeah.
drinking and for showering. So on the road, I don't have that. So left Vegas, went down to Arizona, stayed with my friend for a little bit. And what I wrote in my book, Fake Diseases, was that we were eating a lot of gluten-free cookies, just more than normal. Okay, I've been on the road for months, right, back and forth. Many, many months I've been on the road. I'm pretty stressed out. I'm
Yeah.
working hard, grinding, traveling all over. Vegas is super high EMF. A lot of these cities are super, super high
Mm.
EMF, and I know that, and I'm not feeling 100%. And I'm not saying we pigged out on gluten-free cookies day and night, but we were having them pretty much every day, and I could feel it, knocking me down. I feel it when I have too much sugar, and that's what
Yeah.
it felt like. But then right before I was about to go and go back to Vegas, get on another flight, I was so sick. Super, super sick, not throwing up, not diarrhea or anything, just had a real hard time getting out of bed. I felt totally, totally awful. And in my book, I thought, well, it could have been, the cookies would have been the straw that broke the camel's back, basically.
Yeah,
I've
because
been
you
on
were
the road,
traveling, stressed, all that. Yeah.
yeah, too long on the road. But even then, I'm looking back at it, I'm like, I wasn't really that stressed. It was hectic. It was a long several month haul there, back and forth all over the country. But still, I think there was some kind of a poison involved because when I got to Vegas, I was still super, super sick in Vegas. Flew to Denver, spent Christmas Day in a hotel, curled up in the shower, shaking, shivering. Couldn't eat, couldn't do anything really. And there's no good food at an airport
No.
hotel anyways, so I just said, I'm not gonna eat.
You,
I'm
you
just gonna
said you
ride this
you
out.
you flew, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting because me personally, a lot of the people that I saw getting sick were people that recently had flown. And I made that connection maybe halfway through the pandemic. And then we were talking about it in the terrain chat. All of our friends were flying and then getting sick 2 days after their flight or the day after their flight. So that's for me, my personal, my anecdote, whatever opinion would be that they were spraying stuff in the planes, like through the planes, chemtrails, whatever. And then people in the planes were exposed to that directly. That's what I believe, but other people have their own opinions.
Very,
I
very possible to me. I absolutely hate flying, and I've never
hate I
hated
hate
it
flying.
more than since the pandemic. And I'm not going to go into all my escapades with the airlines during the pandemic because my wife lives in America, by the way. I live in Canada. I'm
Okay.
only allowed to stay here half time, so I'm forced to travel back and forth regardless.
Wow.
But the flying, yes, always knocks me down. You never feel good flying. It never feel good after. Always takes me a long time to recover. I'm talking days, weeks to recover after a flight. And the second time I got sick, probably 2021, maybe even 2022, it was also after a flight. It was also after a flight.
Mhm.
Yeah, I never feel good. There's extra EMF up there, garbage food. I purposefully dehydrate myself, because I don't want to use public bathrooms and stuff.
Yeah,
And it's
I get
just,
it. I get it.
it's so inconvenient. It's so stressful.
And you got to adapt to the time if you're like changing time zones and everything. Yeah.
Yes, it's very, very, very tough on the body. And especially during the pandemic. Honestly, I've never been so angry in my entire life. Just writhing in anger. for everything that you have to go through in the airports. I don't know if you had to fly during the pandemic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I did. I did twice to see my wife. Yeah, yeah, it was not fun. And the whole,
Horrible.
you had to wear a mask the whole time too. It was, ugh, no.
Horrible, horrible experience. I will never forgive the airlines for this ever. And yeah, I'm like drinking wine and stuff too because you can put your mask down when you're drinking, right? So I'm taking the smallest sips ever, and I normally wouldn't even drink on them, but that makes the flight even worse. And yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so that is all. I also never understood in the first place why they made me fly for 3 years instead of crossing the border in my car. Because ostensibly in this pandemic, it's supposed to be contagious, yet you're forcing me to go into an airport with hundreds or thousands of people and then sit on a tin can and breathe recycled air from a bunch of people instead of sitting in my own little tin can and coming into contact with almost nobody. So I had no idea how flying and denying us road travel was supposed to make us less likely to become infected if it was an infection. And yeah, that whole thing was infuriating, expensive, inconvenient, absolute nonsense. But most importantly, for this discussion, it made zero sense in terms of limiting contagion. You limit contagion far more in your car than you do on a plane. Super, super bad for you. And I am open to the idea that something could have been in the cabins or, yeah, some poison exposed in the air of the airports. Like you can't breathe real air anytime. The moment you step into an airport, you're breathing fake air the
Yep.
whole time until you get on the plane, then you're more fake air. It's always been bad for us, but it still was to me a sickness like anything else. And
Mm.
I do think that's why it was a poison. Normally, like I'm in the health business here. I have not actually been sick with a cold or flu or anything in like 10 years.
Mm.
It's embarrassing to get sick. But normally I can feel like again, okay, I've had too much sugar or something. I've stayed up too late a few days in a row, and your body just feels like it's gone down a notch, and then you can rectify it. This was like, no, I'm waking
Yeah.
up one day and I'm at 0
You're
out of
done.
10. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because that's another thing we can talk about. When you really get into this health space and the terrain and all that, you just become so in tune with your body. You can tell when if you keep going, you're gonna get sick. Like your body will literally tell you, and you feel it. So that's what I really want people to just like listen to your body because it knows exactly what it wants and what it doesn't want. Yeah, I'm gluten free too, and I try not to eat any refined carbs or sugar. But sometimes I do like to get a gluten free brownie here and there. But if I eat too much, yeah, I'm gonna feel it, and I'm like, if I eat another one, I'm gonna get sick. So you just gotta listen to your body. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like for me too, like ever since I've learned about this stuff, I don't get sick. My wife, she's from Haiti, so she loves the heat, but every time it gets cold, she develops a cold. Every single time the temperature changes, she gets cold. I don't get sick anytime she gets sick. I was sick 2 weeks ago with very similar symptoms to the one I had in 2022. Conveniently, here in New York, they were spraying ridiculous amount of stuff, and I looked up and I was like, "Whoa, that's a lot of chemtrails." Next day, same thing. I'm shivering, got a pain in my back. It's just, yeah, you just become aware of what's going on around you. But really, same thing. When you make changes in your diet and your body, and you just any nutraceuticals you take, you work out, you do all the thing you got to do, you're not gonna get sick. You're really not. And I think it's a very embarrassing, especially as a man, when you're sick. You feel literally helpless. It's like you can't do anything, and I hate it.
I want to take a step backwards here too, because you mentioned the microzyma
Mm,
from Bechamp. I find this very interesting. So if I could just clarify this. So this is like a primordial form of bacteria that can change shape into what we would call an actual
yeah,
bacteria, depending on what's going on in the body, the pH, the temperature, all this stuff.
yeah, exactly. And there's different names for it. The microzyma was the first name that Bechamp coined, and that's why I use it. But other people use bions or endobionts or somatids or protids. There's a lot of different names, but you're right. It's a primordial form of the microbial cycle. So the first form after microzyma would be bacteria, secondary fungus, and then the third last form would be the molding.
So you're saying these are not separate species.
No,
Mold is
they're
not separate from yeast.
exactly, and they're all the same species. They're all the same body, but they're different roles and different morphology, different actions because they can survive in different mediums. Like let's say a streptococcus bacteria, you can polymorph that into a different bacteria with the right environment. And my friend, Dr. Mary Ars, who's a naturopath, who was also trained by a company that was teaching people about pleomorphism, she would actually change bacterial forms into fungal forms and vice versa. Very interesting stuff. And Royal Raymond Rife, who developed the Rife machine, with different frequencies, he was able to change an E. coli into a fungus, then the fungus into a yeast, and then the yeast back into an E. coli, all with different frequencies and energy by changing the environment. So these microbes, there's obviously specific microbes in the mouth or the liver or the gut. You have specificity in the microbial life of the body. There is, but when there's a change, they're going to change. And in the health space, when specifically if we talk about gut health, for instance, I hear a lot of people talk about, oh, candida overgrowth or fungal overgrowth. That's bad for your gut, this, that, and the third. But it's not the candida. It's not the fungus. The fungus is just there because they changed into that form to survive that environment so that they can eat the deep seated toxicity within the gut. So don't just listen to the fungus, but don't focus on the fungus. Focus on the terrain of why the fungus is there in the first place. And then when you change the terrain, that fungus is going to go right pleomorph back into a bacterial form that is naturally occurring in the gut.
So the candida is the symptom of the problem, not the
Exactly.
cause.
Exactly.
This is the part of terrain theory that I had a hard time with. And I've only read a handful of terrain theory books too. I'm not that deep into it. Again, it's not my specialty. We do vitamins and minerals and food. But so you're saying, and other people are saying, and yes, they say this in books too, that these bacteria, yeast, or fungus, or mold, they are there to eat bad stuff, to eat waste products that are being generated by our immune system. So these are actually our friends.
Yeah, pretty much. In layman, yeah, you're exactly right.
And if we do have an overgrowth, it is because our terrain is off.
It's off. Exactly. And they will then proliferate to respond to the issue that has been accumulating specifically in the tissues. I mean, when you look at the lymphatic system, I made a post about the supposed immune system, which is the lymphatic system is our primary way to get rid of waste. The lymph nodes are full with bacteria. Our interstitial fluids filled with bacteria. Our gut, which is a huge part of the way we digest and assimilate and get rid of waste, filled with bacteria. So it's not the bacteria that are causing your illness. They're just responding. And this was also shown not only by Gaston Essence, but a guy named Gunther Enderlein, who was actually still a germ theorist, weirdly, even though he was showing that germs were just reacting to the environment. He showed that what he would call the pathogenic bacteria, quotes, were just responses to the most toxic environments in the body. And that waste products developed by bacteria, sometimes anaerobic bacteria, they can be harmful to the body. But again, not the cause because of bacteria, but because of the food that they're eating. And you mentioned they're eating garbage. So bacteria are known as stapotrophs. They literally just eat trash. That's their job mainly. They also do a lot of other stuff. They make vitamins like vitamin B12 and they help with serotonin production. They help with a lot of different stuff. Mitochondria are 99% bacteria. So they do a lot of stuff, but their primary role in nature is to eat the trash and then convert all of that trash into nutrition for the body. For example, I brought up recently in a video Staphylococcus aureus, which people blame staph infections on staph bacteria. For one, they don't fulfill Koch's postulates because all of us have Staphylococcus aureus on our skin at all times and we're not sick. Secondarily, the waste product or the metabolite that is created by Staphylococcus aureus actually heals the wound. And it's really interesting. So the bacteria is just seeing the dead tissue, eating it, and then the metabolite heals you. They're literally just there to be friends and help the terrain that they live in. And E. coli too, another one. E. coli's metabolite has been shown to be anti-cancer. And it's really, really interesting stuff.
I'm very interested here. So why do you think there are different species of probiotic bacteria in the gut, for example?
I think there's that different bacteria can specialize in different roles. So like if there's one bacteria that can secrete a vitamin, if there's one bacteria that can help with digestion, if there's one bacteria that can help filter the blood, or if there's another one that can help with digestion of carbohydrates. That's why it's so good to have such what's the word I'm looking for? A diverse microbiome, which is unfortunately cut off from us, specifically at birth, because a lot of births are C-sections. So you're not getting the microbial flora from the vaginal canal. And then you're eating all this pasteurized food that literally is made to kill all the microbes. So we're literally growing up with just no microbial strength at all. And then in our farms, they spray pesticides, herbicides, whatever, that ruin the microbial flora of the soil. The soil's weak and not filled with any microbes that help with the building up of the plants. So you're not getting any microbial support, which is why we have so much digestive issues today. So all of these different supposed probiotics, what they do essentially is add more microbes to an environment that is lacking microbes. And if there's any specific microbes that help with any specific thing, you're going to get a benefit. Personally, I don't take probiotics because I get my probiotics from natural sources, whether it be sauerkraut, whether it be kimchi, whether it be fermented beetroot or raw milk. I try to get my probiotics from that. But for people that are, heavily imbalanced, that have really bad issues, probiotics can be helpful because they're just introducing more bacteria to an environment that is out of balance. And that's what gut dysbiosis really is. Dysbiosis means imbalance. So you just have an imbalance in the terrain. You add more probiotics in there, it's going to help balance it out.
Fair enough. And if any listeners don't know, the microbes in the soil are required for the plant root to absorb minerals. Super, super key. We already have mineral depletion problem because you grow a carrot in the soil, it sucks up the zinc and the iron and the whatever. You take the carrot away, it's gone. It's gone from the soil. So we already have a soil depletion problem, but when we blast the topsoil with pesticides and it's killing all the fungi and the bacteria in the soil, then now the plant is incapable of, efficiently sucking up a lot of those minerals. So now we have weaker plants. Weaker plants do not sustain us as much. And you did mention pasteurization, which kind of have to comment on as well, that when you heat something up, not only does it kill the bacteria in it, and actually it doesn't do that good of a job because it's been shown that pasteurized milk is actually has more bacteria in it than raw. But put that aside. When you heat it up to kill bacteria, you also kill enzymes. Enzymes are the proteins in our body that do all the work practically. We need vitamins and minerals to be cofactors for enzymes, but it's the enzymes that do the work. And our body produces enzymes, obviously, to do stuff. The liver produces various enzymes. When we're talking about immune factors and stuff, those are enzymes that are mostly actually doing the work. We talk about glutathione and other antioxidant proteins in our body. Those are enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that do work. So yeah, when you heat stuff up, you kill the enzymes. And so most of us, most of the time, are eating mostly cooked food.
Dead food, yeah.
It's just basically dead food. It's dead in terms of bacteria and enzymes, and that leaves us even weaker and more susceptible to. I was just about to use the word infection, but Jacob, what would you use to complete that sentence? What word would you use?
I would just use disease. And disease, it's in the word distance of ease. So I'll just say disease. I don't use words infections because it's implied to be causing by the bacteria, but you just mentioned it. When the more food that you eat that is not filled with the enzymes you need, and for example, with milk, when you heat milk and just flash heat it with pasteurization, it's getting rid of the enzyme that helps you digest lactose. So now you have a lactose intolerance problem, and you're going to blame the milk and not the pasteurization. And the pasteurization, they try to get rid of all the bacteria in there. But you mentioned it. You find a lot more bacteria because the microzymas within the milk do not die. You can't kill them. They're just going to respond to something else and then pleomorph into listeria. And listeria is also found in our guts, so not causing bacteria, but they're going to respond to the issues in the milk. So when you're doing all that to your food, you're not getting all that nutrition, which is why I really push for eating more raw food. I mean, I still eat cooked food. I'm not fully raw. I cook my meat, but I make sure it's well sourced, grass fed, whatnot. But I try to eat all my food, my fruits, vegetables, my probiotics, everything's raw because that's how your body assimilates it the best, right? I mean, you know that, I know that. I think most people listening here know that, but it's very important.
It is super important. And I've been saying it for at least a few years now that adding high doses of enzymes and probiotics to our program at the beginning of it, the first month at least, because it can be pricey to continue to do everything all at once forever. But adding high doses of enzymes and probiotics greatly changed our results. I was already used to good results, but not everyone. And it's still not everyone, but adding high doses of enzymes has increased it even more. It's been really, really awesome. I've been trying to incorporate more and more enzymes into my own life as well, and I just think it's an incredibly important thing that a lot of people are missing, and a lot of health advocates are also missing that as well. We do need vitamins and minerals, we do need real food, etc., etc. But when it is raw and we do have more enzymes, it
Mhm.
is a game changer. I'll tell you from my perspective in the business. Jacob, I've got a question for you.
But
So obviously we know antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, those are bad. But what about the natural so-called antibiotics, such as garlic, which is said to be the most powerful, or olive leaf extract, or
mm,
oil of oregano, or anything
mm,
like this? Why would these help somebody who is sick? Is it just because the sickness doesn't last that long in the first place? Like ear infections typically only last 2 or 3 days, whether you use antibiotics or not. Is it really helping? Is it placebo? And why would so-called antimicrobial compounds be present in nature in such categorically good foods such as garlic?
mm. Great question. Love the question. When I was sick like 2 weeks ago, I was actually using oil of oregano, and garlic oil, usnea. You can use dragon's blood, colloidal silver. Even you can use so many different herbal concoctions that I really want to learn more about with herbalism. But and just recently, I think Dr. Steph Young made a great video that herbs are not antimicrobial, and then she goes into it. But essentially, all of these compounds we just talked about it contain enzymes, they contain vitamins, they contain all these great things that help stabilize a disease state. For example, dragon's blood has a high count of antioxidants that helps, again, heal any wound or any issue when you're a disease. So when you add on these herbal compounds that contain high amounts of antioxidants, high amounts of vitamins that help flush things out and clean things out, like colloidal silver has been shown to clean and stabilize the pH, all of these herbal compounds and natural compounds are just cleaning up a site, which is why you would rather use them instead of an antibiotic, because the direct effects, not side effects, direct effects are not going to be apparent. They're not going to be killing the microbes because they're just pushing for different pleomorphism. They're going to be stabilizing the pH, and they're not going to be affecting the adrenals. They're not going to be stopping inflammation the way antibiotics do. And they're not going to be hurting the liver and the kidneys or the lymphatic system. They're actually working with the systems of the body because, I mean, if you want to go deep, our bodies, we are one with the earth. We come from the soil, really. So why would the plants ever want to hurt the things in our body? It's just working in tandem with the body, with detoxification, with opening up those pathways, which is why, if you have ever a gut issue, you can use a bunch of herbal concoctions. You can use different mushrooms. All these things help just flush things out and stabilize things. Whereas antibiotics, as you mentioned, it's just killing, generalized killing. They're killing the microbes, they're acidifying the tissues, they're affecting the adrenals. So when you affect the adrenals, you're stopping the symptoms. Your symptoms may go away, but then it comes back even stronger. And now you have a different pleomorphic bacteria like a staph or like a different superbug, which is just a different cycle of pleomorphism that responds to the antibiotic environment that it caused. So, yeah, I really push whenever you're sick, I would always recommend herbal concoctions or natural interventions. Castor oil is a great one for removal of waste through the lymphatic system in the liver. You can use turpentine and DMSO. You can use so many different things. And the more I learn about it, the more amazing it just becomes that the earth literally gives you exactly what you need. And all of those compounds, like you mentioned, garlic, oregano, for instance, are more beneficial for you and better and effective than antibiotics. If you ever have a cut that is supposedly infected, it has pus or whatnot, clean it up with some activated charcoal, some water, let the things run its course, add some oil of oregano or whatever in there, put a nice little dressing, you're good. You don't have to take an antibiotic. But people need to learn and actually be trained how to do this. And unfortunately, the schools do not teach you how to do that. So that's why I have my place.
I've only got a few questions left. I want to hover here. I want to hover here for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying that they're not actually killing the bacteria, they're changing the terrain where the bacteria are no longer needed, and then those
Needed. Yeah.
bacteria will change into a different form, a good form.
Yeah, the form that was present before the issue occurred.
Is this true in a petri dish as well? Like you mentioned colloidal silver. Colloidal silver will kill almost every, not every single one of them. A lot of people misspeak on this, but almost every single microbe. So what's happening? Is it just changing the pH?
So when you notice these compounds in petri dishes, like colloidal silver, for instance, the pH does change. So that when you have different, like too alkaline or too acidic, you're gonna have a microbial response. But things like oregano oil, things like garlic oil, things like all these like lavender, peppermint, whatever, they're not what they're doing. They're not doing what antibiotics do. So antibiotics, they literally poke holes in bacteria and literally just stop them from replicating and just surviving. They just kill them left and right. Whereas when you use the oregano oils or the colloidal silvers of the world, you're not noticing that degeneration of the bacteria. You're not noticing the holes being present in the bacteria or the prevention of the continuation of the bacterial life cycle. You're just seeing the pleomorphism go back into the dormant state. Why? Because you're introducing good compounds. The bacteria will just go away. They're not dying as with antibiotics.
Okay, so the actual pharmaceutical or poison antibiotics, you will actually see the dead bacterial tissue,
Yeah.
but you won't see that when any of these
Yeah.
natural compounds.
You're not going to see that with the natural compounds. Exactly.
Okay.
But of course, with these studies, they will see bacteria not acting, and then they'll claim, "Oh, oregano oil is a great antibiotic or antimicrobial," which is it's not the case. I mean, they're just helping the body. They're actually working with the microbes, if anything.
Well, I'm glad you so Well, I'm glad you know so much about this, and I want to run two other things by you. Both of them did appear in my book, Fake Diseases, and I'll be quick here. I told two instances where I did get very, very sick. One of them, I dragged a bunch of fleas into my buddy's house, and I woke up covered in fleas, and I also woke up bleeding from every orifice in my body, and it was
Ooh.
extremely scary. I was extremely disoriented, weak, and I went to my doctor, family doctor, I asked for antibiotics. He gave me the antibiotics, and I immediately felt better and I recovered over the next couple of weeks. What do you think happened there?
Was that with the fleas, or was that a separate occurrence?
This is with the fleas.
The fleas. So I know with bugs specifically, and I covered this with a Lyme post I made recently. Most insects that act in a quote parasitic type of way do secrete certain toxins in their fangs that can be injected into the blood and cause issues. And in my post with Lyme, I was showing that the idea that it's a bacteria has never been founded, and that the bacteria said to cause Lyme actually exists naturally in all of us, but that Lyme toxicosis, which is a reaction to Lyme poisons, can lead to the very symptoms we call Lyme. I had a dog in Brooklyn that brought fleas into our home, and oh my god, it was so annoying to get rid of them. The bites hurt. They were like this big, and their bites are freaking hurting the hell out of me. I'm bleeding a little bit. We eventually got away from them. I didn't get sick. It was just a nuisance, really. But I do know certain insects do secrete certain venoms, and I do know certain fleas also contain venoms that can go into the blood. So if it was the case where you were bitten to the point that something got into the blood, like we talked about in the beginning, it bypassed all of the functions the body has to prevent something from getting into the blood. Their bite stuff got right into your blood, and then that leads into an issue, whether it be pH, whether it be damaged tissue. Bacteria come in, they start eating the waste, but then you start bleeding, you start developing symptoms, because the symptoms are the reaction to the bacterial action, to the removal of everything that's being digested. So when you use an antibiotic, yeah, you're getting rid of all the bacteria that are eating the dead tissue that's been affected by whatever is in your blood. That's fine. But is it really stopping the prevention of the disease tissue from being removed? That's the whole thing with antibiotics. All they do is kind of push things deeper and deeper into the tissue. Same thing with anti-inflammatories. So it can help you in a very acute state. I personally, I don't take antibiotics. I tell people don't take antibiotics. But if you're gonna die, if you're in a septic shock at a certain point, yeah, you can try an antibiotic, see if it works. But many times it doesn't work, or it can lead to other issues, especially if you take them profusely for every little issue you have. So I'm against antibiotics, but in a case with your case, if you had a lot of like blood being removed from your orifices in every part of your body, yeah, probably in that instance you can take it. But I wouldn't again blame the bacteria because they're the ones removing the stuff that is causing the bleeding. I would really more blame the fleas because they injected something probably in your body that your body didn't want.
Yeah, I genuinely thought I was gonna die, and I
But
did.
so you mean, or if you mean your eyes and your mouth and your nose too and everything?
My eyes, I'm pooping blood, I'm peeing
That's
blood,
crazy.
my ears, like, and this is just after one day. I just woke up, so less than 12 hours here. Crazy. I'm bleeding from every orifice. Scary. I had to crawl up the stairs, like I could barely move. And
Jesus.
I didn't know anything about nutrition back then, but knowing what I know now, I honestly probably still would have gone to the doctor because I don't know what any of these natural
That's hey,
things.
that's one thing I always say with allopaths. The one thing they're good at is you're gonna die. Help me. That they're really good at keeping you alive. If you have a gunshot wound, bad car accident, go to an allopath. They could put you back together. Everything else, don't go to an allopath.
The one other incident that I wrote about in fake diseases was when everybody in our village in Costa Rica, including two, three of my Western friends, everybody got sick with, um, they called it Zika virus that year. Right, this is when they were
Yeah, that
calling it
yeah,
Zika virus.
yeah.
Oh my God, my brain is, what is it supposed to be called? Dengue.
Dang, yeah, dang.
We all thought it was dengue at first because that's what the villagers described the symptoms of dengue. But across the entire, country of Costa Rica, and I'm sure it's similar in the other tropical countries down there, dengue was quite rare. Like it's like chickenpox for us. Like you might get dengue once in your life, but that's kind of all it's expected. And maybe there's one case, four cases in a year or something like that. But all of a sudden, this one year, and they were calling it Zika on the TV, so we started
Mm.
calling it Zika. Everybody was sick. Everybody, young, old, fat, thin, foreign, native, didn't matter. What do you think happened that year?
I remember the whole Zika and dang stuff on the news and everything. I made a post about another disease said to be caused by mosquitoes, malaria. And in that, you know, information I was finding, it was again no evidence that the mosquito was actually leading a parasite into the blood or this, that, and third. However, a lot of these diseases that are proper to be caused by mosquitoes come from tropical environments. It's Costa Rica, a tropical environment, very hot, a lot of water that isn't being flowed properly, maybe swamps and all that. And the thing about stagnant water and specifically swamps in tropical environments, they can off gas, things like methane and other toxic gases that are breathed in by the people surrounding in the environment. And those symptoms that are caused by the gases are literally indistinguishable from the symptoms that they claim Zika or dengue or malaria are. And I'm also, counting the stuff that you go to the hospital and you have malaria, they give you a bunch of different toxic chemicals and you don't get better and you actually get worse. And they'll say, oh, the malaria is taking course and it's going to kill you or whatnot. So, as with everything with terrain, there was obviously something in the environment that caused people to develop illness. Whether it was off gassing of stagnant water or people drinking water that isn't filtered properly that was exposed to something toxic, don't know. I wasn't there, but that is probably where I would look at first, obviously, before any supposed Zika virus or dengue virus or what.
Yeah, I'm still confused myself, and we did all get it at different times. It was one person after another, and we all had hydrophobia, which is
Really? That's weird.
one of the strangest symptoms ever. And I was there with my friends, right? So we were forcing each other to shower and go into the ocean. We figured it would do good. We forced each other to drink water and forced each other to eat because whoever came down with it first, like we were all sick at staggered times.
Hmm.
And so whoever was sick would not want to eat, would not want to drink, would not want to touch water. It is very, very strange to be scared of water. Like water is like
Hmm.
needles on your body. Like, I don't want anything to do with water.
How long were you guys sick for?
It was about a week, each of
A
us.
week. Interesting. Hmm. That's interesting.
So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, because the only other illness that I've ever seen associated with hydrophobia, so-called, is
Is
rabies,
rabies. Yeah.
and I don't believe in
No.
rabies. So
Hmm. That's interesting. I'll probably look into that after after this, see what's up.
yeah, you don't have to have every
Yeah.
answer. I'm picking your brain
Yeah,
here,
of
though.
course.
It was very, very, very strange, and like I said, all the villagers are aware of what dengue is. Most of them had got it at some point in their life, but yet they all got it again this time. Meanwhile,
Mm,
that's not supposed to happen. That's like getting
no, it's
chicken
not.
pox twice.
Yeah.
So it could have been a poisoning or something, but
Yeah, there
this
was
was
something, yeah,
widespread.
something
This
happened in that specific environment that was toxic exposure of some type.
it wasn't just Costa Rica. Obviously, there was many countries that were involved
Yeah.
as well, but even us, we're very, very isolated. Like we're talking dirt roads here. We're many, many hours on a dirt road from a city, very isolated. So the water supply and everything like that. So it's not like 2020 where potentially they could put some poison in the water
Yeah.
supply and hit every city in America. It's not like that. We're in our own little isolated miniature sewer system
Mhm.
here. So I don't understand where the contamination came from, or if it was chemtrails or anything. I don't think so.
And obviously, the whole contagion myth paradigm doesn't work either because, again, isolated environment, probably not a crazy amount of people in one area. So nobody just came and brought whatever virus or whatnot to these people. You guys all got sick around the same time. So that's interesting for sure.
It's an interesting it's an interesting case, so we can table it because we don't have answers right now, and
Yeah.
I still don't have answers. The last thing I wanted you to comment on was formaldehyde and these other toxins in
Mm.
these vaccines. Why do they use them?
So they use a lot of these, primarily a lot of these toxins are used in the cell culture experiment itself. So they get breakdown of the cell culture faster when they add formalin, which is formaldehyde water solution. They add glutaldehyde, which is used as a staining and to clean the cell or whatnot. They use hematoxylin. They use trypsin, which is an enzyme eater. They use eosin. They use all these compounds, which are then found in the runoff of the cell culture. And then they use the runoff of the cell culture as a constituent for the vaccine. But then they say we need something to stimulate an immune reaction. So they add aluminum, aluminum hydroxide usually, or any other heavy metal you can think of that's been found, like mercury even. And then they use that to stimulate the immune reaction, the inflammatory reaction, so that your body can then intake the virus and have a reaction or whatever. That's literally why they do it. And they also use attenuated vaccines. So to kill the virus or inactivate the virus, they'll use aluminum. And then that constituent is then found in the vaccines to then be injected into your blood. But obviously, we know none of those stuff belongs in your blood. And if the virus itself was actually in there, why do I need an immune reaction caused by aluminum if there's a virus in the vaccine? That should be enough. But no, it's never enough because they need more toxins in your blood. And that goes deep into chronic issues, the injections of foreign material into your blood. None of that is good for you. But that's literally what they say. And then they say, since you have an immune reaction, you'll develop antibodies to whatever is in the vaccine. Then you're immune for life, even though we know that's not the case.
This is one thing that always got me, even when I believed in germ theory. How is a germ that you say has been killed and it's in a bath of poison? Like formaldehyde is what you like preserve frogs in science class, right? So it's keeping the tissue sort of intact, but it's 100% dead. How is that dead virus supposed to provoke me to produce antibodies or something? Like I can't even explain it because I have no idea
They
how this is
say
supposed to
that the
work.
antibodies in your blood will recognize the proteins of the virus and then have a memory reaction so that when you're exposed to it in nature, you'll be able to survive and have no reaction. That's what they say. It makes absolutely no sense because one, there's no virus particle in there for one. And two, antibodies are non-specific proteins that respond to different stressors. So to claim that there's monoclonal antibodies or antibodies specific to any virus is completely false, like straight up false.
Okay. Yeah, I still don't get it either. And the whole
Yeah.
antibody thing too, and how sometimes they'll say, "Oh, you have a disease because you have antibodies," right? Like in the
Yeah.
case of
HIV. Yeah.
HIV. Yeah.
Yeah.
What how does this possibly make sense? I thought antibodies were my body conquering something. I thought that was a sign that we've conquered a pathogen,
Yeah.
but yet that's a sign of disease for
It's
diagnostic.
literally whatever they want. With COVID, it was the same thing. Antibody test means you have it, or it means you're sick, or it means you're not sick. HIV means you have it, but chickenpox, it means you'll never get it. But then you get it again in the form of shingles, and then herpes is the same virus as chickenpox. So, like, it's just it's nonsense. It's literal nonsense. It's just circular reasoning beyond circular reasoning.
It's a mess. Okay, Jacob, I'm holding a book here. It's called Virus Mania. You've
Mm,
probably read
yeah.
it. It's by many authors. I recommend this book. To me, it's the best one I've read so far on terrain theory. But here on the cover, they've got a bunch of diseases mentioned: corona or COVID-19, measles, swine flu, cervical cancer, avian flu, SARS, BSE, hepatitis C, AIDS, polio, Spanish flu. Do you have anything else to add to that list of what we might be able to safely call a fake disease?
Let's see here. Well, I didn't hear the Black Plague, so the Black Plague for sure. That was fake disease, as in it wasn't what they claimed. Leprosy, for sure. Uh,
Leprosy. What do you think leprosy was?
leprosy. It was very similar to what smallpox was. I made a really in depth long post about leprosy, and it also included biblical sources as well because it was a biblical illness, an ancient illness. But it was they would find in all this literature that leprosy affected rocks and homes and clothes. So it obviously was not some contagious illness. And it was the same thing with smallpox, where the people that were affected with leprosy were actually living in communities, and much of the community did not have leprosy. But it was found that people who were not hygienic, who were dirty, who had dirty homes, usually developed boils in their skin, and their skin would essentially rot, and they would develop leprosy. So that, to make it short and sweet for people that are listening, you can check the leprosy post for actual information. But most of these skin illnesses, whether it be smallpox, whether it be measles, chickenpox, or leprosy or whatnot, are necessitated by usually hygiene issues in the environment, and that's why your skin is the strongest, biggest organ in the body. It can filter out things from the blood and just push things out. Eczema too, for example. Eczema was actually a reaction to vaccines, but now everyone has them because we're putting crap on our skin 24/7. But that's a fake illness too. I think they said polio, but I mean everything. All the diseases that they claim exist are not real illnesses. Now, we're not saying the symptoms don't exist, because symptoms do exist. We know they do. We know people get sick. We know disease exists. But all of these symptoms are really the same symptoms when you really look at it, whether it be rashes, whether it be flu like symptoms, whether it be fever, inflammation. All of it is just a reaction to something ruining the terrain or the homeostasis, the balance. So your body only has so many ways to heal. It's going to do everything it can to get rid of stuff from the body. That's why symptoms are expulsion. You remove stuff. But then when allopath comes into play, they'll say, oh, this disease is this virus, this disease is this germ, this disease is this germ. And then they can push the vaccines, they can push the mask, the antibody tests, the interventions, all that, so they can make money. But before, I mean, we didn't talk about this, but before, I think it was like around the 1930s or so, the vast majority of medical institutions in the United States and Canada were all natural. Homeopaths, naturopaths, chiropractors, osteopaths, they were all natural. Then came the Flexner report, Abraham Flexner and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and all that. They pushed this report out. They delegitimized all natural medicine, and they brought in their allopathic medicine that was built upon the industry of antibiotics, of all these medicines that were completely synthetic based off the petrochemical industry. And then they make money. That's what it is. So all these disease, markers that they make, all these fake illnesses are just made to push and solidify the foundation that was created by the Flexner report.
Fair enough. Most of the followers will know about the Flexner report and
Good,
how things
good.
changed since, and how doctors since that time have only been taught allopathic medicine,
Mm-hmm.
drug-based medicine, drugs and
Drug
tests and
based.
surgery and stuff that makes money. And of course, that's always been connected to the insurance cartels and
Yep.
governments. And this is the only thing that is considered legitimate. That's why your insurance will not pay for our vitamins and minerals or for your organic food or a vacation at the beach, which would be good for your overall health. Anyways, they understand that, I hope, and it looks like we could dive way deeper into a lot of different things. I invite you to come back anytime that you would
Oh,
like.
absolutely.
This was a lot of fun for me. You speak very well about this,
Thank
and
you, man. I appreciate it.
yeah, and taught me some stuff here too. A lot of this I still don't understand. Like I said, even you explained the antibody thing, and I'm like, okay, I can kind of understand antibodies, but how the heck is a dead virus supposed to? I guess it's not supposed
No,
to make
it's not
sense.
something you can't rationalize ridiculous thinking. You can't.
You think it's just supposed to be like, oh, it's so confusing that it makes us think, okay, I guess we better just trust the doctor because I
But
don't get
that's
it.
what they want, right? They don't want people to actually read the virology studies because they think they're special. They think they're smarter than us. So they publish these papers that 200 people will read. They all laugh in their labs and say, "Oh, we're so smart." They don't expect us to read it because most of the nomenclature is very hard to understand. What the hell is cytopathic effect? Like what? But then when you actually learn about it and actually just teach yourself and you have the right people learn teaching you, you're going to get it and you're going to be able to see, oh, this is all crap.
Definitely make sure to follow Jacob Diaz, the Undercover Virologist. There's no "the" in it. It's just on Instagram,
Yeah.
Undercover Virologist. And his Telegram and Twitter will also be in the description. And remember that you can find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org, including all the books that I've written and helped publish. And a new one is coming very, very soon. I'm haggling with Amazon at the moment to get it out. You will see that on the website, notusbooks.org. You can also see the free audiobook versions of all of my books and hundreds of book reviews. Most of them are about health, and an archive of this podcast is there as well in case we get taken down again, which we might, especially if we keep doing episodes like this. And if you're listening on audio, you should know that I have been posting these episodes to YouTube and Rumble as well if you want to see the video versions. And all the episodes do go up at least 1 week early to Patreon, sometimes several weeks early if I'm very on top of things, such as right now. I am very on top of things. So there's a few episodes there that are unreleased. You can check them out on Patreon. You can see all of my links and channels and everything in the description and on my website, notusbooks.org. And Mr. Diaz, thank you again. This has been fantastic. Do you have any last words?
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I love having these conversations. I'm a total dork. I can talk about this for hours on end, but terrain is you guys. It's just you. You're responsible for your own health. Don't let anybody else tell you different. And if you ever have any questions, obviously Ryan is free to answer. I'm free to answer. Any of us are free to help you get to the path of true health.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay healthy, my friends. Until next time.